I'm Greg Piche. This is my wife Jill, and this is our '64 300K.
When did you first see the car? How did you find this car?
I found this on eBay, believe it or not, in 2010, and I received it at my house in April of 2010. Sight unseen, other than pictures. And yes, there was a few surprises when I got it.
What caused you to want to buy a 300 in the first place?
Well, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, we went to a lot of car shows, and I was into the muscle car Mopars at the time. The Challengers, the Chargers. I still have a '69 Coronet RT that I bought in '82. So I was going to the car shows at the time primarily to see those types of cars. And every now and then I'd see this big Chrysler would be there, 300s in it. And then the more I found out about them, the more I realized that these were really the predecessors to the Chargers and Challenger RTs. And it was very much as much a muscle car as they are. It was the original Mopar muscle car. And that's how I got into them in the first place, and I became a 300 Club member originally in the 90s sometime. I think it was the mid-90s. But I actually didn't get my first 300 until this one, and that was April 2002. And since then I got another K, and I have an F as well. That's my retirement project.
How long have you been a member of the club?
I renewed my membership right after I got this car in 2010.
Have you done a lot of the restoration yourself, or was it in pretty good shape?
No, it was not in very good shape. It had a lot of problems. I did all the restoration work myself, everything that's possible to be done. I mean, I can't bore a block or chrome a bumper, but I did all the engine work, jobbed out what I couldn't do myself. I painted it myself in the garage at home, redid the interior myself. The car, when I bought it, had a red crushed velvet interior that somebody thought was a good idea in the 70s at some point. So that was one of the first things I had to do, was get rid of that red crushed velvet interior.
Was it just seat covers, or was it actual upholstery?
It was an upholstery. It was a professional job somebody had done, and I found that out when I went to tear it all out. It's a great job, but it was about as gaudy as could be. And I do have the original build sheet to the car that was under the rear seat. Plus I got all the information about the car through the club. Gil Cunningham sent me the information. And so I knew exactly, the car was a black interior car original. So that's what I put it back to.
Do you normally drive the car to the meet, or do you trailer it?
No, it's driven everywhere it goes.
Okay. And I missed, where do you live now?
Commerce Township, Michigan.
Michigan?
We're probably about 35-40 minutes from here.
Now, do you have a family connection with Chryslers? I mean, you said when you were younger, you used to go to a lot of car shows. Was your dad into cars, your mom into cars?
My dad was not into cars, but he did work at Chrysler. He was a tool and die at Chrysler for 30 years.
Okay.
So you put the bread and butter on the table, and that's how I got into Chryslers in the first place.
Yeah.
It was just because my dad worked there, and that's what he bought. But he always drove Newports and Polaras and Valiants, not 300s.
Do you expect to buy any more Chrysler 300s, or are you pretty much happy with the ones you have?
Well, I think I've got enough on my plate with the Black Ram 64 and the 300F. Yeah, it's not in the near future.
It's going to be a while.
Yes, it's going to be a while.
My name is Marshall Larson, and I have a farm outside of Foley, Minnesota.
And what have you brought today?
Well, I brought my 59 300E.
Okay.
And I saw this, actually I saw another car on an online auction, and I went to look at that car, This car was sitting alongside of it, but I was I was there for the other car, and I made the deal on that car and continued on my way. About 2 days later, I called back to the seller of this car and said, I'll take this one too. So that's how I ended up buying it.
How long have you been a member of the 300 Club?
I believe I joined in about 2004, somewhere in that range, so not a long time.
Do you take this car to several meets each year?
Well, not meets, because the club has 2 meets per year, but as far as car shows, yes, several a year.
And have you had to do much restoration on the car, or is it pretty much like you bought it?
Well, this car is as I bought it, except for I've never bought a car yet where everything worked as far as instruments and clock and things like that. So I have repaired all of those items, so now it's fully functional again.
Okay. Is it something that you drive to the meet, or do you trailer it, or?
Well, I've not trailered it, and I literally, I bought this car in Alabama, and then had it transported, both of the cars, to South Florida where I wintered. So then I drove it from South Florida to Minnesota, and then to here to the meet.
Okay. So, have you got any family connections with Chrysler? Was your dad a Mopar guy, or did he like into cars much, or is it just something you picked up?
Well, he wasn't into cars. He was a farmer, but he liked Chrysler products.
Okay. What is special about this car that you haven't talked about yet as far as your story goes? What would you say is that distinguishing factor about this particular?
Well, the primary one is that it has a self-dimming rear view mirror. That was an option, but very few cars had that.
Yeah.
And this one has it.
Amazing. Do you have your other car here today, or did you just bring this one?
Just this one.
Okay.
I also have an F and a G. The F is in Florida, the G is in Minnesota.
Okay. I think that's about all the questions, unless you have anything else you want to add that comes to mind either about either this car or either the other 2 cars that you want to talk about.
Well, the F is a totally original car. That one has 23,000 miles on it.
The F does?
Yes, and it is a terracotta.
Wow.
And this one now, with all the travel I've done, it has, I think, about 47,000 miles on it. So it's virtually original too.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
I'm Steve Beard. I'm from Delaware, Ohio, home of the Little Brown Jug, and I brought my 1960 Chrysler 300F.
Okay. And why did you have a Chrysler 300, and what made you choose to buy this car?
My older brother had a Chrysler 61 300G convertible. My younger brother had a 61 300G coupe, and as being the middle brother, wanted a 300, so got me an F.
Where did you find this car?
I found this car behind a barn in Pickerington, Ohio in 1973. Engine was blown up. They had taken it out to a drag strip locally, blew the engine up, took it home, put it behind the barn, and let it sit for a couple years. And when I found it, it was rust bucket. Engine was locked up, and paid the guy $100 and towed it home. Told my parents I bought a car.
Did you do restoration yourself, or did you have help, or how do you do that?
when I got it in '73, I was going to Ohio State, and I didn't have a lot of money. So the first thing I did was get the engine unlocked and got it running. I never did body work, but I learned how to do it on this car, and got it running, but didn't have any money, so I just drove it when I could, and carried it with me until I got married and moved it to a new house, and never really did anything to it until I retired in 2008. And in 2008, I said I was either going to sell it or fix it, and I fixed it. Got it back on the road, looking like this in 2015, and drove it with a single 4. And last year, I said I wanted to put the Rams back on, and because that was the last piece of the car puzzle, and got the Rams put on in 2020, and it's the first time the car's been out of the state in probably 50 years. First time the car has been driven over 200 miles in 50 years. It's the first car show it's been at in 50 years. And I did a lot of some of the interior restoration. I put all the interior back in, but the body was done by a young guy up in Delaware, Ohio. He had the body for a year, and when it came back, it was my job to put everything back on it. Interior, bumpers, headliner, everything. So
You talked about your brothers owning Chrysler 300s. Was your family a Chrysler Mopar family, or was your dad into cars much? Or?
Oh yeah, we were Mopar. My dad's first car was a 57 DeSoto 2-door, red and white, Hemi. He then bought a 61 DeSoto 4-door, and then he bought a 64 Newport. I ended up with the Newport, and then he had a 70 Newport. So we were a Mopar family. My older brother was a Mopar mechanic, but unfortunately my older brother had passed away, and his G is gone. And my younger brother just sold his G about 3 years ago, so I'm the last one standing in the family.
The last Mopar.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything that's different from the original as far as the engine or the brakes or anything like that you've upgraded?
The engine is not original to the car. Unfortunately, in about 1980, I was working on it at my brother's house, and I had to drain the radiator, filled it up with water. In November, he called me up and said, "You better come over. Water's running out of the garage." The block cracked. They couldn't weld it. So, not having any money, I told the engine guy, just put a 440 in it, same block as a 413. Rams could go back on. So that's about the only thing that's not original to the car. If you had $5,200 in 1960, this is what you could get. And everything's pretty much original. Hubcaps are original. The Rams, air cleaners. The interior is all new. I mean, it's aftermarket, but it's what the seats look like in 60, the interior looked like in 60.
My name is Bob Kelley, and I'm from Waukesha, Wisconsin, outside of Milwaukee. And I brought with us today a 1960 Chrysler 300F.
What moved you to choose this particular car?
It was, I started out by looking for the 1961 G, and I was sort of struggling finding one that was a good driver and fairly reasonably priced, that appeared to be a dependable road car. And I was struggling for over a year. And then I said, you know, there's not a lot of difference between the F version and the G version. Let's broaden the look-see. And I found a F in Massachusetts, owned by a previous club member. And the club member before that is a longtime Chrysler 300 member by the name of Jerry Kukar. So this is a Jerry Kukar car that he had for probably 30 years, but seldom seen at club events.
Do you take this car to club events quite a bit, or is it?
Yeah, we have. I've taken it this year to Louisville, Kentucky, to the National Street Rod Association. It was kind of a big hit down there. There wasn't any other Chrysler 300s. I also took it to back to the 50s in Minnesota, and then here, plus a few local shows, and in the home territory. So I'm probably pushing about 2,500 miles on this car this year.
And it sounds like you drive it to the meets.
Yes.
And you don't trailer it to the meets.
No, I wanted a road car.
Yeah.
And dependable, and reasonably accurate, in its condition.
Well, speaking of condition, what changes have you made apart from the original that maybe didn't come on the car, but you added it for your own enjoyment?
I don't think I've added anything that's non-original. The big project we undertook after we purchased the car was getting the air conditioning working. And fortunately, there's an air conditioning shop in our area that likes old Chryslers. And he was able to reconstruct and get it working, the air conditioning system. That was my biggest improvement. The car has been proven to be quite dependable since I've owned it. I was very pleased with the lack of repairs I've had to do since I've owned it.
How many miles do you have on the car?
I think it's just about ready to turn 65,000.
And those are original, as far as you can tell.
As far as I can tell, yeah. Because Jerry didn't drive the car much, I'm kind of assuming those are original.
Do you have any family connections with Chrysler? Was your dad a Mopar guy, or do you know people that? How did you wind up being interested in these cars?
Our family was pretty much GM, and I was GM when I got my driver's license. And in 1965, I was working in Phoenix, Arizona, and going to school at Arizona State. And I had a 57 Chevy at the time. And for some reason the car, I don't remember what was wrong with the car, but it was giving me kind of fits. And I was looking at cars on the used car lot. And I pulled in there was some shiny object that appealed to me, and I pulled in there. And I asked the salesperson if I could look at this one car. He says, "You don't want to look at that car. You want to look at this white Chrysler next to it." And I, not being a Chrysler guy, I didn't know what he's talking about. And it was a white 61G. And he said, "Let's go for a ride in this car, not the one you're interested in." And we had the ride. And first of all, the first car I ever was in with air conditioning. And of course the horsepower was fabulous. And I was awestruck by the car. I didn't end up buying it at all, and nor did I buy anything else. I ended up driving the 57 Chevy back home. And then when I got out of the service, I started looking for a 61G. We had one that we purchased in 1971. At the same time, I joined the club in 1971. So I'm not an original member, but pretty close.
Yeah.
And then another shiny object came along after Nancy and I were married, and we sold it to a family in Iowa.
And then I think it's 2015, about 5-6 years ago, this club had an event in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. And I said to Nancy, I said, let's go up there on Saturday because that's when they'll have their car show like today. And maybe our old G is up there. Well, it wasn't there, but it kind of rekindled the interest. So that's when I rejoined the club shortly thereafter and started to hunt. And then, like I said earlier, it filtered down to an F or a G, and then we found this wonderful F.
Wow, that's quite a story. Is your car been featured in any magazines or publications or anything?
It has not. However, there's a possibility. When I was at the Street Rod Nationals this year, a photographer, professional like yourselves, came by and says, I'm collecting pictures of cars with Coker tires on them, which we have. And he says, I don't know which ones they're going to select for their advertising, but it might be yours. And he took several pictures and had me sign a waiver and all that. And it may or may not show up on a future Coker advertisement.
Okay.
My name is Rob Kern from Lawton, Oklahoma. This was my first collector car, 1957 Chrysler 300C. And anybody that gets into this hobby and restores any collector car, you have to have some sort of an emotional attachment, and you have to have a spouse that's entirely understanding. You have to have financial resources, and you have to have patience and stamina to carry you through the process. I've had this car for 18 years, and I finished doing the last thing for restoration about 6 months ago. But I've managed to drive it all the way through during that time. I've replaced or refurbished or rebuilt or repainted every single part of this car in the past 17 and a half years. Never regretted it. Never doubted that it couldn't be fixed. And being in the Chrysler 300 Club International has been a lifesaver because there's a tremendous source of knowledge about all of these cars and resources to get parts and get things done. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this vehicle, and the biggest thing about entering the hobby with this vehicle is that you meet so many neat people. We have a saying in our club that you come to see the cars but you stay for the people. And to paraphrase one of our former members, I really think we could all go on a cruise ship and not be able to bring our cars, but have just as much fun as when we go to these meets.
Yeah, that was John, wasn't it?
John Hertog, yes.
Yeah, he was. He was a great guy. So, when did you see your first Chrysler letter car, 300 letter car, and what attracted you to...
I was 4 years old, going for a walk in the neighborhood with my mom and dad. It was before my sister was born. Mom was expecting her. We had a 57 DeSoto Fire Sweep Sportsman. Dad traded in a 55 Packard Clipper on it. I went up with him to the dealer, and when we pulled on a lot and he pointed to me, he says, "That's our new car," I just kind of fell to my knees because those fins and the taillights, and for a car guy, 57, especially with a forward look, is like the light of the world coming. Everything before that was BC, and AD started after that. So I thought that DeSoto was the cat's pajamas until we go for this walk and we passed by a neighbor who was a lawyer, and he had a brand new 57 300C Chrysler. And I just fell down looking at the taillights. And I was swept off my feet by it. But that was the only one we saw for like 8 years. They were a very rare car. They were really a car for people that could afford a $5,700 on-up car back in 1957. And so they were a car for professional athletes, professional people, people of means, or people that didn't have means but were very disciplined to save money to get them. And my dad said, "That's the fastest car in America. It's very expensive, and I love it, but you know, I can't afford it. It runs on premium gas, and that's 29 cents a gallon." but those memories were seared in my mind. And so you fast forward until the year 2002, and we're at a Thunderbird club meeting, and we had just bought my wife for her birthday a 2002 Ford Thunderbird, so we got into our first car club. And the day of our Christmas party, a buddy of mine called me and said, hey, you know, let's go visit this guy's car collection in town. He only opens it up once a year. This was early December of 2002. And we saw it, and I was just so impressed with how meticulous this guy was in his restoration process. So at that Christmas party, I was talking to a bunch of car guys, and I said, you know, if I ever wanted to do a collector car, I'd probably like to do a 57 Chrysler 300C or 58 300D. Where that came in my mind, I do not know. 24 hours later, I found this on the internet in Half Moon Bay, California. And that's all she wrote. Put down a deposit toward the selling price, and on the 13th of January, we journeyed out to San Francisco, went down to Half Moon Bay with the rest of the balance in a cashier's check, drove it for about 10 miles on Highway 1, and bought it. Actually, it was delivered on Sunday night, the 9th of February, which was my father's birthday. And I said, this is right. When I took it for the first drive 2 days later, we had a sunny day in Oklahoma in February. I turned on the AM radio, and it was a replay of the voice of Mel Allen of the New York Yankees talking about a Yankee ball game. And my dad and I always went to Yankee ball games. I says, this is meant to be.
That's really neat. So, how long have you been a member of the Chrysler 300 Club?
18 years.
18 years, okay. And did you have to do a lot of restoration to this car? Or
Everything.
Everything on it. Was it rusted pretty bad? Or?
No, it was a West Coast car, okay. And didn't have rust problems. But you know, it was a driver, but it had a lot of issues, and we started off with a few things, and then things snowballed. We got to a certain point we thought it was great, and then I brought it in for something after the first 8 months, and the engine block was cracked. So then we did the engine, did the transmission, and things snowballed, but it never stopped me from enjoying it. I would get a glimmer of what it's going to be, and that kept sustaining me to keep moving forward.
Have you done any modifications to the car to modernize it and make it more drivable?
Well, my predecessor, Wayne Grafin, who was the model year consultant for the 57 300C, who I replaced in 2009, he told me, he says, when you're going through this process with this car, upgrade it to modern standards. Put seat belts in it. Put disc brakes in. Put a coolant recovery system in. And I did all those things. You know, everybody in front of you and behind you has got disc brakes.
Yeah,
it's a heavy car. It was made to go, but not really to stop well. Coolant recovery systems. You don't want to be burping all over the driveway at Panera Bread, you know, when you're at a car show. And then the seat belts. I mean, these are nice leather seats, but you just turn a corner, you know, you're in the passenger seat. So I did that, and then I converted the factory AC system to a modern aftermarket old air products and vintage air front and rear system, so I get more drive time in it in Oklahoma. But I put in a aluminum radiator with electric fans so I could get better cooling. But other than that, that car is the way it should be.
Great. We were talking earlier that the original 300 Project DVD was introduced at your club meet in Lawton, Oklahoma. Can you talk a little bit about that meet and how many people showed up and what was...
Well, I went to my first meet with my wife in Dayton, Ohio in 2003. When we got home, I said to my wife, I want to host a meet. And back then, we were booked out 2 years in advance for people that want to host meets. So I called the president of the club at that time, George Reel, and I says, how about the autumn of 2006? In Oklahoma, we've got beautiful weather. Don't do a spring meet in Oklahoma in 2006 unless you want hail damage. And he says, fine, you can do it. And that's how that started off. And it was so exciting doing it, planning it. We had a great turnout. We had 23 letter cars, and then we had some specialty cars. I mean, the first prototypical Chrysler Saratoga with dual quad setup on the Hemi came with Lambert disc brakes, and that was one of the test type mules for the first Chrysler 300. And Wayne Grafin brought that up, trailered it up from Kerrville, Texas. So it was a special event. It was a lot of fun. It was the first time I did my game show that's become popular in our club called Letter Car Jeopardy.
Yeah, I remember that. So, yeah, I was at that meet. It was a lot of fun. So, is there anything else that you could think of as part of your 300 story that you want to make sure that everybody else gets to hear about?
The automotive history that was made by Chrysler Corporation in 1955 with the Chrysler 300 really started the whole horsepower war game. It was the first muscle car. And I often thought, you know, the muscle car wars and all this stuff, like, people are going to get killed, it's going to be reckless and all that stuff. But then I started seeing some stuff by the chief Chrysler engineer for Chrysler Imperial, Bob Roger, who was pretty much the father of the Chrysler 300, promoted the horsepower and the handling as a safety thing. And when you're on the road now and you're driving these cars, you need to have that power for safety. And you need to have the stopping power for safety. So I really think what was started by Chrysler Corporation with a muscle car, yeah, it was big entertainment, but it also made drivers, I think, safer and better. Having power is important. Having braking is important. Having handling prowess is important. And these are all incorporated in these full-size vehicles. This car drives like a modern car. It stops like a modern car. It's as fast as a modern car. Faster than a lot of modern cars. And totally enjoyable. And I feel as safe as possibly can because it's big with a lot of sheet metal around it. You know, I've got other Chrysler performance cars, Challenger SRT8, I got a Hellcat Charger. So I followed the progression that Chrysler started.
You know, and the neat thing about these cars is you never mistake it for something else when you see it because it's totally distinctive.
It's kind of funny. I always back my car into the driveway at an incline. And Helen Keller can tell you it's a Chrysler because she could feel the letters. And people walk by and say, "Oh, we love your 57 Chevy." And I pause and say, "Thank you."
They only made like 1,725 of those cars.
Oh.
which became heavier, but they didn't increase the spring tension.
Very nice, sir. Very nice.
Thank you.
Now, did it originally say 300E on the valve covers?
Yes, because it is a 300E,
Right.
and this is the way the car came. In fact, all letter cars came with dual foreguards.
Right.
And if you didn't want those,
Okay.
then don't buy it, because that's the only way they
Now,
came.
I'm looking. Are you signed up for the interviews? Okay.
Young guy that was recommended to me took a look at it and said, I want to do that. So he had it for about a year. He didn't do the rotisserie thing or whatever. Did the body. We got the truck where it hits. We got the space thing in the middle where I really roughed it out. When I came back, no bumpers, no interior, nothing. Yeah, because what happened in probably about 2007 or 8, I had to kind of work on it. Got a friend that we do it. And I didn't know anybody. Said he's really good, and his brother's a body guy. Put it all back together. They would have been about the same size. The Imperial would have had, the Imperials would have had, if the Imperials had extra length, it was probably right here. Yeah. Otherwise, the body would be like this. Unless it was
So all of these cars here are mint, like they're all legal, right? There's nothing.
Not all of them.
There's an
That's that white one.
It's an amazing amount of time and money. Well, so when I
This card's been messing the frame in back off.
I appreciate your time. We're looking forward to doing this. Since we did one 16 years ago, and we're looking forward to updating this one. And there's 2 or 3 people that were in the original one that are also in this one, and so it'll be interesting.
Now, what is your name?
Chuck Harris.
Okay.
Chuck? Yeah, Chuck Harris. Harris? I'm David Coston. I appreciate you coming in, and we'll be willing to do an interview. Well, you can have a seat on that, and we're finishing up this car, and then we'll do yours. And I assume you don't have a car here today, but all we're wanting to do is talk to you about your experiences today, because this whole interview is all about the Chrysler 300 and where it was made and the history of it, and it sounds like you've got a lot of that information. So, it's great.